I need a win. My name's Martin and I've got too many cars. My current restoration project is this, a 1984 Matra Rancho that's been off the road for 28 years and it's pretty rusty. You know how it is, it's January and that's a rubbish time to be doing anything on classic car restoration, at least in the northern half of the planet. It's either below freezing and you can't feel your hands, or it's above freezing outdoors and it's pouring with rain and you can't feel your hands. For lots of people, money's a bit tight, me included. We all need a win, right? So in search of a win, I'm going to make a start on the metal fabrication work. And not only that, I'm going to start with the most complicated piece of fabrication that I can find that needs doing on the car. It's probably worth explaining that I'm still very new to this whole car restoration metal fabrication game, and having looked the car over, the thing that most has me waking up at 3 in the morning wondering how I'm going to do it is this A-pillar. It's pretty hard to tell what's going on with it, so the first thing to do is to take the door off, supporting it with a jack and tackling the screws with some Bulldog BDX releasing fluid. The bolts undo and you can wrestle the door off without too much difficulty. At least you can once you remember to snip the speaker wires. Like I didn't. Before I go any further, I'm also going to weld on this bracket to hold the hinges in the right place, because the last thing I want is for them to get out of alignment as I'm messing around with the A-post and find that the door won't open and close properly or sit correctly in its aperture. The A-post itself is a fairly simple, basically a big box section. But there's this recess here, which is where the check strap sits when the door's closed, sort of like a finger space behind a handle there. It curves this way, and then it curves that way to make the recess. And that's going to be quite tricky to do. This has to be flat, and it has to be the right distance back, and this has to stay flat, and that has to stay flat. It's quite involved to make, so might as well throw myself in at the deep end. This is where I'm going to start. I'm starting with the recess. I'll cut out a small piece of steel, mark the area that I want to keep flat, then some diagonal cut lines at 45 degrees, and then just make the cuts, and that gives me the basic shape to start bending. I'm folding the long edge first, so I'm folding the short edges, the sides, out of the way. Then for the actual bending, there's a combination of hammering on my homemade pipe anvil, more on that in a minute, and some old-fashioned brute force, just to get that initial curve in it. And then after some careful measuring and marking to make sure I've got the right depth, I can make a crease and then bend that flat back into place to complete that long edge. I'll do the side pieces in the pipe anvil. This was originally supposed to be a classic full-length pipe anvil, but my COVID fog brain mixed up millimetres and centimetres when I ordered the steel, so I've only got a stubby little thing. But that's ideal for this because I can just make it open-ended. It's only welded down at one end. So where you've got an existing fold at right angles, you can slot it in at the open end, and it doesn't foul on the anvil. But even then, it's not always entirely straightforward. The problem is it's fouling here, so I need to make this slot wider or something. That's getting there now. It's the right sort of shape, just needs some finishing on a dolly to sort out the corners and just to get everything lined up square and neat. I'm pretty happy with that for a first attempt. I think it looks pretty good. Just needs some welding up. And then grinding off to finish. I'm using my finger sander rather than a flat wheel because it's better for getting into all those corners. The main body of the A-post I'm planning to make out of one piece of steel. I may end up cutting it into smaller sections to actually fit it to the car, but I figure it's probably easier to make it all as one, and so it's all the same shape and dimensions, rather than try and make three pieces that all match each other. To make it fit for this job, plus all the sill work I'm going to have to do on the Rancho, I've had to pimp up my cheap metal folder quite a bit, using some angle bracket and some steel bolts, and some Ford electric blue paint. I'm pretty happy with the result. It's put a nice, fairly tight and certainly very even fold in this 1mm steel, so that's a minor win right there. I need to cut a hole in this piece so that I can weld in the shaped recess that I've made before. To do that, I'm going to have to cut a section out of the front face here, but I want to leave enough of a lip so that I can hammer it over and make a nice rounded curve, which will be neater but also stronger. I'm tacking the recess section into place, overlapping the main piece, and then I'll use the grinder to cut through both layers so that I've got a join that is exactly matched across both pieces. And then what I can do is grind off the tacks, remove the overlap, and use the neodymium magnets to hold the recess in place in its custom built slot. And tack it in, and then check the alignment of everything. What I've done is I've allowed too much for the thickness of the steel, and so this doesn't line up very well. So I'm going to have to, that's fine, I can make it a more gentle curve and bash this bit up. But it's going to leave me a really big gap there. Tricky. I mean, I can fill it with weld, I think, but it's made it a bit harder than it should have been. So with a fair bit of hammering, that's lined that up pretty well. There's a wider gap than I'd ideally want, but I can bridge that with some weld with a copper heatsink behind, and it all should be good by the time it's ground back. So I'm just pressing record, but you can see I've got a reasonable set of welds there. Really just a weld on the copper heatsink, and there's good penetration underneath. I'm welding the panel in with lots of individual stitches so that I can manage the heat build up and don't warp the nice flat panel. So it's not the prettiest, but it'll grind back okay, and there's decent penetration on the back. I've just got these bits to do. And it looks messy because I've only roughly ground the welds back, but it's the right shape. The cruellest month had one last twist of the knife here because the primer is too cold to spray on without spattering everywhere. You can warm it up though using some hot water or even a flask of tea as a substitute. Ask me how I know. It's not the prettiest panel ever, but that's because I haven't done huge amounts of grinding back of welds. But it's strong and it's the right shape and the right size, and by the time I've tidied that up, maybe with a little bit of filler if I can be bothered, that'll look really good. And plenty of penetration in those welds through to the back. So that's not going anywhere. This may not look like very much, but to me it's It's an excellent start, and it shows the promise of the future. It's the win I needed. And if you want to see more of these adventures, then watch this video next. I think you'll like it.